Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'd like to, so I'll just be giving an introduction. Basically, we've got a number of speakers this afternoon who are going to be basically going over the topic of privacy and trust and asking the question, how to ensure management and control of identities and rights. So, so basically, as you all know, this is a critical time for privacy. Digital infrastructure, ICT, is in everybody's life every day. We're signing up to new services online all of the time. But what happens to our identity and what happens to our information? There's a growing number of companies who are holding our data, and this is increasing every day. And I've got a very interesting slide next, just to give you an example of that. But at the same time, there's a significant and increased amount of cyber attacks and people trying to access our data. So who do we know, who we can trust, and how much information and how much data can we really be sure is safe and being held appropriately by these organizations? So privacy and trust has an impact on governments, has an impact on businesses, and it has an impact on citizens as well. And awareness is obviously growing with new legislation such as the GDPR. The impact of an attack or the impact of losing data from organizations can be damaging to SMEs. It can be damaging to large companies as well. And this can be incredibly damaging, not just from a financial perspective, but also from for the brand of a company, and can have long-term impact on a company. Okay, just one moment. I'm just having a couple of problems with my slides. Okay, so this is a really interesting slide. Apologies that you're seeing my half of my. You're not seeing the full screen. 1 second. So this is just an example I found just getting ready for this webinar. It's from a few years ago, but it just goes to show how the number of companies working in ICT is growing. This is going back quite a while, but back in 2014 there was a large number of companies providing different marketing services, online marketing services. This is basically in the US, and you know, this number had grown massively in a number of years. So you can imagine the size of companies providing this type of information to organizations today. So as I said, are we sure that these companies are able to manage their data, manage our data, or not? How do we know that each of these companies have got their houses in order? So with the GDPR, you know, you see a lot of best practices and information about what SMEs should do in terms of dealing with privacy issue and ensuring that their services are trusted. And the GDPR is a really good way of getting best practices on a global level. It raises the bar for privacy issues in general. It raises the bar internationally with a European standard, and it also raises awareness of data protection for citizens as well, and the importance of privacy and the importance of understanding whether or not a company is an organization that's holding your data is doing it correctly. Better guidelines are needed for SMEs because SMEs are a growing victim of cyber attacks. So SMEs need to be better prepared, and of course the GDPR is something where SMEs can also be fined for a lack of appropriate data protection. But the important thing is that compliance to the GDPR gives companies the competitive edge, not just in Europe, but internationally as well, because it is such a good standard. So as new legislations and laws come out in Europe, so the research community are very often asked by the Commission through various open calls to address issues of privacy and also, of course, cybersecurity. And I've got here some examples of projects, some of which have actually finished and have ready to use results which focus on different aspects of privacy and cybersecurity, but in particular here, privacy. Now, this is one of the main focuses of the project, Cyberwatching, which is the organizer of today's webinar. And part of our job is to assess what's happening in the research area of cybersecurity and privacy, and to actually monitor what is happening. So we work very closely with projects like these that are listed on this slide, and there's a link there to this catalogue of services which we have on our website, which basically gives more information on some of these research projects that are addressing issues of privacy today. And in fact, one of our speakers, Dave Fortune from the Aries project, is going to be talking a bit about how his project is trying to address these issues of privacy for Europe. So as I said, the Cyberwatching project basically helps projects, it observes what's happening in Europe, and it helps projects in terms of validating their results and helping projects to get a bit nearer the market. Many R&I projects, you know, they focus on areas of research, and perhaps the focus is totally on research and less on actual innovation. So we really try to give projects a bit of a helping hand in terms of getting their results nearer to their end users through the introduction of a marketplace. So we've published the marketplace in October. And this is basically a place where, in particular, projects who have results which are potentially ready for use, and also we invite SMEs who have services in cybersecurity or privacy to publish their services on our marketplace. And in fact, we have Jorge this afternoon, who's one of these SMEs who have published their services on our marketplace. And as you can see, the marketplace covers a variety of areas, and we classify our services in a number of ways, one of which is of course privacy. So so that's basically the background, a little bit of background to today's webinar, and just to tell you a little bit about the Cyberwatching project. So finally, I'd like to also promote the annual Privacy Forum, which is taking place in June in Rome, and there's actually a call for papers which I've just received from the European Commission about 10 minutes ago, actually. So it's good that I'm able to promote that here. So if you need to contact me, my name is Nick Ferguson. I'm the coordinator of the Cyberwatching project, and please do contact me, and I'll be staying online if anybody has any questions as well. So today, I think we finished with my blurb at the beginning. I'll be handing over to Norman Rona in a moment. So he's from the Digital SME Alliance organization, which basically has excellent insight into what SMEs need in a privacy and trust for privacy and trust perspective. We'll also be hearing from Anastasia Bozzi from ICT Legal Consulting, who will be talking about legal tips and compliance requirements. So very much a legal perspective from Anastasia. Then, as I mentioned before, we'll be hearing from Dave Fortune from the Aries project, which looks at, in particular, trust and a very important aspect of ethics. And then finally, we'll be hearing from Jorge Marcos from Simarks Software, who will be giving us an interesting perspective into zero privileged accounts. So one of the points I raised earlier is the human aspect of privacy and making sure that your staff members, if you're an SME, the people who work for you, are fully up to speed with what is happening and with the type of data that your company is handling. So that's enough from me. I'd like to hand the floor over to Norman, please.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm very pleased to be here and speak on behalf of Digital SME. And one moment. Now you should see what I see on my screen. Okay. So how are SMEs addressing privacy and trust today, and what do they need to know? The situation is, as Nick has already very much described, that cyber threats pose significant risks for any organization, but in particular SMEs. On the one hand, there are very strong incentives, which are also have been strengthened by very much significant efforts that have been made to promote these. Cybersecurity is, of course, a means to establish consumer trust, which also through the efforts that have been made to impose regulations that that SMEs need to comply to. That also promotes the uptake of cybersecurity as a more urgent matter, the GDPR, and all of these, of course, lead to competitive advantages. But at the same time, even stronger barriers remain. One thing is that's very much a problem for SMEs is that many SMEs think I'm not a target, it's only the large enterprises which are targets, I don't need to worry about cybersecurity, and that's, of course, a big problem in the uptake of any measures that are being put forward. Another problem is that SMEs, with their only limited personnel that they have one guy who is responsible for everything that's ICT, and so the security part only takes up part of it, and so the resources there are limited. On the other hand, if there's even smaller organizations where the ICT is completely outsourced, then the lack of understanding and what's happening is, of course, a big problem there, that the SMEs themselves don't know what's happening and don't know if what they are buying from some other vendor, if that's adequate and in any way what they need. All of this, of course, comes down to budgeting constraints. It's another expense where if you either need to employ another person, if you need to invest into infrastructure and so on, there are massive budget constraints. And it all comes down to that information security risk management is very inadequately developed in many SMEs. And what is a factor that is from European level and national level being put forward to try to address that is the development of standards and the promotion of standards to improve cybersecurity. But here is the issue that the number, as for now, of standards that are available on cybersecurity are limited. They are mostly targeted at large organizations and don't scale very well down to the level of SMEs. And SMEs in general lack awareness, and that's where we need to, we need to improve. All of that means that in the whole cybersecurity landscape, SMEs are a weak link in our chain, and we need to address their needs more adequately. The result or the importance for data security in SMEs is directly related to the importance in the value chain, which is quite massive. And because of that, and lawmakers and policymakers are aware of that importance, they are trying to put on forwards and make mandatory compliance requirements for SMEs. But the tools that are provided to be compliant are very often inadequate or non-existent. If you look at the example of GDPR, which Nick has rightly quoted as a best practice example, it still is a problem, or there's still many problems with it, even though it is a best practice. Because since the nature of the threat and the way that GDPR deals with the threat is very much a risk assessment-based approach, that means that there's no common solution for every SME, and that there's a checklist and these simple steps that SMEs can follow to be compliant to it and to be secure. Every SME has to make their own assessment. Every enterprise has to make their own assessment, what they need to do to be compliant, and that creates complications, and that makes it very difficult for many SMEs to be compliant. All this, in result, leads to a need that we need to keep raising awareness, and that there very much a need to provide more training and more practical guidance for SMEs to take cybersecurity seriously and to overcome these barriers. And one example I would like to list for that is the SME guide for ISO 27001, which Digital SME has created and which has been recognized by NISA for now. And Sensenilec have voiced interest that they want to take up the guide and publish this as an Sensenilec guide, that then it gets a much better uptake and will have much better use. And that's it from me as a brief introduction from the SME's perspective, what needs to be done and where we stand today. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. So from that perspective, then we'd like to move over to Anastasia, and so very good points. I think that Anastasia can continue on. Both ICT Legal and Digital SME Alliance, of course, are partners in the cyberwatching project. So it's great to have Norman, who has a very clear understanding of what SMEs need in this area, and how ready they are for things like the GDPR, but also how ready they are for respecting their customers' privacy. So now, from a legal perspective, I'd like to hand over to Anastasia Bozzi.
Thank you very much, Nick and Nicola. Thank you also to Norman for mentioning the need for raising awareness and providing further training, not only to SMEs, but also to individuals, to ensure that everyone is aware of their rights and the opportunities that the new legislations have given them. So a little bit about our firm. We provide international consultation around the world. We have different offices in Italy and in the Netherlands. Mostly we deal with multinational clients, so we have seen also the challenges for bigger organizations, but of course the challenges remain for smaller organizations and for SMEs. A little bit about myself. I have been working in ICT legal consulting for a year now, focusing on the implementation of the General Data Protection Regulation and the e-privacy, which is coming up. I have conducted also some research on the legislative management of cybersecurity risks. So I understand very well that this is a multidisciplinary field. It does not only have to do with legal, but I will try to portray the legal perspective as easily as possible so everyone can understand, and it's not just legalese. So to do that, I would like first to go over the basic definitions of the General Data Protection Regulation. And of course, the first is the personal data. Personal data is relating to an identified or an identifiable natural person. An identifiable natural person means that they can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular to an identifier. So this can be your ID number, your location data, or other related definitions to yourself, such as IP address, for example, as well. Then comes the data controller, which is basically the company or the public authority and agency which determines the purposes, which is the why, and the means, which is the what and the how of processing. A processing activity is when an operation or a set of operations is performed on personal data or on sets of personal data, and it includes both automated means and also the human factor of people literally processing your personal data. Processing is quite a broad definition, so it doesn't only include using the data, it also includes simply collecting the data, storing it, structuring it in any way, or altering it in any other way as well. So the processor then, what the data processor does is he processes or the personal data on behalf of the data controller with specific instructions, again, from the data controller. So they should be only doing what the data controller instructs them to. An important definition that we should mention before we go into the whole presentation is also accountability, because this is a definition that has changed quite a lot in the past in this new regulation, and it consists of the controller's responsibility to be accountable, but also to be able to demonstrate his compliance. So it is not simply about having the compliance, but it is also about demonstrating it in the outer world. This is a very important aspect that we will go into further later on. And last but not least, of course, is the special categories of personal data, which in a nutshell include the three categories that I have listed here. So it has to do with data concerning with health. That includes physical and mental health of a natural person, the genetic data, and biometric data, which is physical or physiological and behavioral characteristics of a natural person. These last are a bit more self-explanatory. So what is this general data protection regulation? Why has it been such a big blow in the whole market of the world? The reason is that it has presented a very broad territorial reach. And what this means is that if you look at the two criterions we have listed, the GDPR applies firstly when the processing takes place, regardless of whether it is in the union or not, but the controller or the processor is in the union. So if you process personal data and you're located within the European Union, then the GDPR applies to you. But also, the GDPR applies to controllers or processors which are not established in the union. However, they still process personal they monitor the behavior of data subjects within the union, or they offer goods and services to data subjects of the European Union. So location is a bit more relative when it comes to the general data protection regulation. So what are some legal tips we can give to businesses when it comes to the GDPR and legal compliance? Going back to the concept of accountability, what this means is that the data controller has the responsibility of ensuring that they're able to demonstrate their compliance. And how can a data controller do that? By implementing appropriate technical measures and organizational measures. So technical measures can include things such as encryption or pseudonymization, and organizational measures can include data protection policies, privacy policies, as we have seen have changed very much in the past months, complying with approved codes of conduct and or certification mechanisms, as well as was previously mentioned by Norman, is extremely helpful, especially for small and medium enterprises. Of course, accountability does not stop at the previously mentioned technical and organizational measures. A very important obligation is the record of processing activities. And there are some misunderstandings on this point, such as that if you have more than 250 employees, you do not need to keep a record of processing activities. And we are trying to debunk this myth, because there have been further guidances from the European Data Protection Board where they mention that even for an organization with less than 250 employees, when the processing is likely to result in high risks to the rights of the data subjects, when the processing is not occasional, and when the processing includes special categories of personal data, this obligation of maintaining a record of processing activities still remains, even for smaller and medium enterprises. So we want to always make sure that we get that point across, because it's one of the points of course, raising awareness for the GDPR. Some categories of what the record can include, and we will be uploading these PowerPoint slides later, so don't worry about getting all the information. But an example can be, for example, the name and the contact details of the controller, the purposes, of course, of the processing, specific purposes of why do you need to process this personal data, a description of the category of the data subjects and the categories of the personal data that you're handling. The recipients of the personal data is very important, especially when it comes to recipients in third countries, which is countries outside of the European Union. Of course, transfers of personal data and further limitations that appear to the personal data and the categories of the data. Of course, this can remain open and can depend on the kind of data that you handle. But all in all, this is a good list of what your record should contain. Now, some other obligations of a data controller include, of course, providing the correct information to data subjects when it comes to the identity of the controller, knowing who receives and who collects this personal data, the purposes of the processing, so why do you need to process my personal data, and of course the legal basis is an extremely important point which needs very specific assessments. And here we have listed the six different legal bases that any controller can rely upon. When it comes to consent, it needs to be clearly distinguishable from all other matters. It needs to be intelligible, easy to understand, easy to access. It cannot be clicking on several links in order to get to it. And of course, it must be in clear and plain language so all data subjects can understand. Then secondly is the performance of a contract. Of course, this applies more towards processing personal data of providers or of your employees, since you're relying on the contract. Legal obligation is when you have laws to apply to, such as tax laws that require you to collect personal data. Legitimate interest, vital interest usually has to do with a life or death situation, and public interest mostly relies upon by agencies and by authorities. So not for most of the speakers, of the attendees of today's webinar. Lastly, we have, of course, to ensure that our data subjects are informed about their rights and they are free to exercise them. So the most important rights that all data controllers and, of course, the data subjects should know is the right of access to your personal data, the right to rectify it, the right to ask for an erasure, the right to restrict the processing, the right to data portability, to being able to transfer your data from one data controller to another without trouble, and the right to object to the processing when you believe that the data controller is violating the applicable laws. Now, something that we also heard earlier from Norman is that the concept behind protecting your personal data is based on a risk-based approach, which means that the people that handle your data, the processors and the data controllers that collect your data, cannot any longer rely on a checklist of security measures. So what they need to do now is assess the processing activities that they have and find the relevant measures that they need to take in order to ensure that your data is safe. Of course, this is a huge challenge for SMEs, seeing as they have much more limited resources than multinational corporations do. However, there are tools that you can use in order to ensure that you do have a proper assessment of your risks and you implement the correct security, technical, and organizational measures. So as a means of example, what appropriate technical and organizational measures may be is the pseudonymization and encryption of personal data, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to ensure that there will be constant confidentiality, integrity, and resilience to the processing systems of the services, and the ability to restore the availability and access to the personal data in a timely manner if there is an unfortunate event of a technical data breach. An important principle for data subjects as well as for companies and processors is, of course, the principle of transparency. Every time the data gets processed, it is extremely important to process in a lawful manner, so choosing the correct legal basis in a fair and transparent manner. And this means that the information relating to the processing of the personal data needs to be concise, It needs to be easily accessible, understandable, and with clear and plain language, as mentioned earlier. Another very important principle that everybody should know, and is actually a very old principle. This is not something new. So the attendees that have been part of the cybersecurity and privacy sphere for years will know that this is for sure one of the most core principles of data protection, is the principle of data protection by design and by default. And some months ago, I heard this phrase, think privacy, design privacy. And I thought that this was a great way to portray the fact that you need to consider the factor of privacy from the very beginning of designing your product or service, not just as a byproduct of your goods or services. So what this means in the GDPR, we can find it in Article 25, and it has two aspects. The first aspect is that at the time of determining what you will process, as well as during the processing itself, the data controller needs to have designed the the service or the good with data protection principles in mind. So, for example, data minimization is a great way to do that, ensuring that you only gather the data that is necessary in order to conduct your good or your services. The second one is implementing technical and organizational measures which ensure that by default, only the personal data which is necessary for the specific purposes are processed. And this can apply to the amount of personal data you collect, the extent to which you process it, the period that you store it for, and whether it is accessible and by who it is accessible. So, principle of data protection by design and by default. Think privacy, design privacy. So, all in all, after what we've said, we can then create this little scheme where accountability starts always from the data protection by design and by default, in order to then move on to understanding your processing activities and assess whether you need to do something further than what you think. Sometimes you will need to conduct a data protection impact assessment, which actually the French Data Protection Supervisory Authority has provided a great tool for. Once you conduct the data protection impact assessments, you can then assess which security measures are appropriate and also hopefully implement a data breach management policy and procedure in case it might be needed. Hopefully not, but unfortunately, as we've heard also from Norman, most likely at some point in the life business that will occur. Then, of course, providing the correct information to the data subject with the correctly chosen legitimate legal basis, and ensuring that the rights of the data subjects are known and are able to be exercised in an easy manner. And here, as a matter of fact, we would like to bring up the data protection self-assessment toolkit, which has been provided by the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the Data Protection Authority of the UK, which is a great tool to assess your compliance as a data controller, as a data processor, and giving you further information, for example, on marketing or on the record of processing activities. Lastly, of course, as most of you probably know, the fines and the sanctions that can be enforced under the GDPR are quite large. They can reach up to 4% of your business's total annual worldwide turnover, or 20 million euros for, of course, for a more limited set of violations. But this is something to think about when considering compliance requirements. If you would like to stay updated, please feel free to sign up to our newsletter. We try to update it frequently every month, so you can always stay updated with the latest news, and we always provide practical advice that you can follow, no matter how large or small your business may be. Thank you very much for your attention. Please feel free to submit your questions if there are any, and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. That was excellent. Great overview of the GDPR, and again, showing the link with the SMEs as well. So, and as Anastasia said, if you have any questions, then please pop them in the box for the questions that you have on the dashboard on the control panel, and then at the end of the session, we'll be coming to those for all the speakers. So we talked about the law, but what happens if you're on the wrong side of the law? And we have Dave Fortune. Very pleased to have Dave on as our next speaker, who has an interesting background with the police and on a EU level, and with organised crime and counter-terrorism. But he's also the founding director of the Sahur project, Sahur company, which is UK-based SME, and they're involved in a new project called the Aries project, which looks, as we said, at trust and ethics. So, Dave, I'll hand over to you now, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invite, and thank you also for giving it your time to listen to me today. Just as we've saying, yes, a former police officer, so I'm sure it's quite rare maybe for some of you to hear a former police officer talking about trust and ethics in context. And I just want to follow up on one point Norman was saying about crime prevention in his presentation. Having spent many years in policing, I can tell you that most of the law enforcement agencies' crime prevention thinking is still very physically based, in terms it's all about alarms, physical security, and very, very little about cyber security. And there's a real skills area gap within the law enforcement agencies, as well as SMEs, about being aware of the current cyber threats. But anyway, I digress, and sorry for that. A quick thank you to the EU for Horizon 2020 for funding Aries, which, if nothing else, gets the reward for the most creative title generation from reliable European identity ecosystem to get Aries as its name. So that's what it is. I shall tell you a little bit about the project and the consortium, hopefully. There we go. As you can see, it's quite a balanced consortium between industry and some big names there, research with the university, SMEs as in Sahar in the middle, and then we've got a service provider, an e-commerce provider based in Portugal, Sinai, and then we have 3 law enforcement bodies based in the UK, Spain, and Belgium. The interesting thing about that is they all come with different perspectives, different cultures, different aspirations, and different desires when it comes to trust and ethics, as well as actually developing the whole project. So one of our jobs as sitting in the middle little SME was to bridge the gap and link those disparate partners together in terms of their understandings and their desires, so actually we could focus not just on delivering the project, which obviously we would do, but also actually embedding the trust and ethics aspect within the project. Again, just a little bit of overview of the project there. As you can see, actually it's nearly coming to its end, comes to its end in February 2019. And a bit like the UK's Brexit journey at the moment, it's been a very eventful journey. And actually it's continued to be an eventful journey with those different perspectives, but actually we have reached a common consensus of approach. We have delivered the ambition there that was actually articulated in the proposal many, many years ago. And actually I shall just go on now to talk to you a little bit more focused about the big words highlighted there of how we dealt with the trust, privacy and ethics aspect, and actually embedded those into the key drivers of the project. Again, another aspect was societal issues, and one of the early things that we discovered and discussed was just because it's technically possible or even interesting to do certain things doesn't mean to say we should do it because of whether that's a legal, ethical or societal acceptance factor. And we did a lot of work in the early stage of the project, looking at societal acceptance and linking that into actually what we wanted to do. So that was the challenges we all faced. Again, I won't bore you with just reading out the slide in terms of the objectives, but the key ones there were to actually, the bottom two, which was to run some citizen-orientated scenarios. One is an e-commerce one, and one is an airport one. Not so much border control at the airport, but more about how we could use EIDs, both in a boarding gate scenario, but also in the duty-free shops, to see if we could actually create something that allowed people to make age-restricted purchases using their virtual ID, not to show how old they were, just to show whether they actually qualified, whether they're over 18 or 21, whatever it was. And again, this key aspect of legal, ethical, and societal aspects of the ID adoption and barriers to that, which were seen as key to actually future implementation of any results this project did, or as we said before, the whole range of other EU projects that have other pieces of the jigsaw being ready actually, and keep that lessons learned going. So what have we done so far? We have actually defined some legal. We've gone through the GDPR process with our legal partners. We've done the ethical research, what we've done the societal requirements, and then we've created this architecture, and we've actually implemented it in the two demonstrators using a passport and the Spanish ED&I things. This has created an app where we can upload onto a mobile device, a portable device, using facial recognition, and we hope to do in the next month some voice biometrics recognition, all of which pose big ethical and challenges. We've also learned from a commercial aspect some of the business benefits that actually we can see, and certainly as an SME ourselves, thinking about this as how we would help commercialize any future results of this project and other projects, and to prove that actually there are benefits by letting the public gain access to services or carry out business transactions much more safely online, which was a key barrier to adoption. You know, and we've done this, as I've said before, in terms of age-restricted purchases, using the minimal disclosure principle of not disclosing a full age, just the fact that you're over 18, etc., etc. Basically, what Aries allows people that use our system or the app is they can decide, they can create multiple identities on their smart device and actually decide what characteristics or data they wish to disclose to the requesting body. You don't have to disclose all your data all your time. And certainly the initial feedback we have gained from the participants in the project pilots to date, we've run one e-commerce and two within the airport, and we will rerun another e-commerce pilot in February next year, is that actually in general people do want to use this type of technology. They do see it as a benefit, but they do have some concerns about the privacy and their data management, which must be addressed to actually make any product fully commercial. So just to focus a little bit more on ethics and trust, we reviewed ethics codes and those barriers to adoption, as I've said before. We know that there is biometrics involved. We have used facial recognition, we're looking at voice, but it's not a panacea, it's not the magic bullet that's going to fix everything. We need to meld this technical and non-technical mix together to actually make it acceptable for the customers or the citizens to use. We've done the airport and the e-commerce, but we have adopted throughout this whole project this what we term the golden thread approach of trying to weave in the ethics, trust and privacy and legal throughout all the technical developments, throughout all the discussions, throughout all the work. And that has been a challenge. I'm not going to lie, it's not been easy in some points. And it's not just about the person involved in the project clearly saying, of course we sign up to that. It's about understanding that actually it's about the whole agency that they're working for, to understand that actually it will make a sustainable future proofing for their business model as well, because we know as we go forward, compliance or lack of compliance is not an option. So we've done a privacy impact assessment. We've done all those things that are listed there. We do have an option within the project to create what we would term a secure vault, which was something that the law enforcement agencies were particularly interested in. So as well as just keeping your information on your own smart device, you can choose to lock it away on a secure vault. Then should you lose your data for whatever reason, and subject to legal challenges and processes, want a law enforcement body to access it so they could issue an emergency passport, or they could do some further investigations, you can grant access to that. Again, that's a challenge. It's work ongoing, but we're trying to move this just from privacy impact assessment to ethics impact assessment. And just like Anastasia was talking, in terms of data protection by design, the whole principle has been sort of ethics and trust by design as well throughout the project. And we've probably pinched that idea and wanted to run it on into our project too. It's a very key fundamental part of the project. In short, and to summarize Aries in a picture as opposed to a lot of words, what we're trying to do there is strengthen the link between the physical and cyber security. So you don't trade one privacy off against the other. You actually strengthen both at the same time, which we believe is the way forward. And we hope that actually going forward, the principles of this will be adopted and learned from and embedded into future work. I just want to go back slightly before I finish in terms of some of the principles, the ethical principles we did adopt to look at both in the test process and that's throughout the project, because I think they're probably the things you need to think about, is how Aries is adopting the principle or not going against the principle of doing no harm, ensuring that everything was technically sound, autonomy, ensuring that the rights to consent or withdraw were embedded in any consent form, making sure we maintain the dignity of everyone that was involving it, equality. Again, we know at this stage it's just a research project, and actually there are more and more different technical platforms that we need to look so we don't exclude anyone by actually not allowing to make use of these technologies as it goes forward. Obviously privacy, which we've touched on with other people, to making sure that actually the settings are correct so you only disclose the maximum information you wish to. No mission creep, no linkages unnecessary, and all in all, it's this whole challenge of maintaining this balance between what the project sets out and what everyone else wants, and make sure there's no what we would call function creep or mission creep within the project. So I think that's about us. My details are there, or my colleague Juliet, who's much more the ethical technical expert, and we can be contacted for more questions should you wish. So any questions, I'll try to answer them now or later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's excellent. Really interesting insight, and very interesting to see all the different types of organisations who are in the Aries project, all working together on this one topic, and the different needs, etc., and demands that they have. So what we'll do, we'll open the questions at the end. So If you do have a question for Dave, then please put it into the question box in the control panel. So and interesting to hear a project which is also near the end. So Dave, you know, you should keep in touch with us, because we're promoting all these projects. Maybe there's a bit of an area of collaboration that we could continue with in terms of helping you test your results through the SME end user club that we have on the cyberwatching portal, and then perhaps in the marketplace. And in fact, the next speaker that we have is Jorge Marcos from Simarks Cybersecurity, and Jorge is going to tell us a bit more about again, we said before, the human aspect here and taking perhaps the human aspect out. And Simarks, of course, is an organization which has published their cybersecurity services on our marketplace. So we're extremely happy to have Jorge presenting here. So Jorge, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank all the people for giving us the opportunity to present our company here in this webinar. We are a Spanish company that our first and principal focus is to have zero privileges accounts in the networks, and then by this way removing the human threat. But why we think that privileged accounts are very, very important, are so important. As you know, many networks and principal and specifically SMEs have a lot of privileged accounts, and they are used by attackers to access to the confidential data. So, but this is not new, because the principle of least privilege stated by Garner in the 2006 stated that networks and administrators must achieve as least privileged accounts as they can. So, because privileged accounts are involved in most of cyber attacks. This principle says that the least privileged account you have in your network, the safer it is. So we put the focus on this principle, but we start with a question. If the principle is so important, why the organizations doesn't achieve or doesn't start projects to reduce the number of the privileged accounts? Because there are consequences. The consequences of applying these principles is very strong. For example, we need this kind of accounts to take administrative stacks. For example, VIP users doesn't want to have doesn't want nothing to do with technology. They want to do their jobs without these problems. Application management is one of the reasons, for us, is the main reason why administrator privileges are granted on the network. So this is from the side of IT, but from the side of security people, security staff, they want to fight against malware, so they are very retrieve, so to offer or to access privileges account. We have the fight against from productivity against security, right? But in our thinking, what will be the ideal solution? What the ideal solution was that no administration's accounts were in the network, right? But if we need these administration's account, how do we do our job? If we haven't any administrative accounts, we are more safer, right? But only authorized application, we want that only authorized application may be executed with administrator privileges, of course. There are a lot of the other administrators that need the sub privileges, but from the security side, they said if I give you this administrator account, you can use it to execute applications, internet of web, for example, that attacked with exploit, right? And the users only can install authorized application. Well, the state of the technology today doesn't provide a solution for these 4 questions, right? There are a lot of administrator can have been taken into the field, especially from the Gartner report from June 6 of this year, where the first project they recommend that the first project that CICOs must achieve in this 2018 year is the management of privileges account. Of course, there are a lot of solutions, named globally privilege account management, PAM, but their approach is as a privileged account is necessary, we are going to control to who, for what, when, and what we do with this kind of accounts. All right. Even in this last 3 months, there are a lot of commercial and companies movement for acquiring some companies. But what is the Simarks approach? The Simarks approach is to address the consequences of applying POLP, principle of least privilege, and so protecting the most vulnerable element. And how do we do that? We have developed a core designed to control the security context at security level. So with this approach, we offer the real possibility to reach zero privileges account, because the privileges now are granted to application instead of users or accounts, right? How do we do that? Applying security at application levels offers the possibility to not having any privileged account. All users are standard account. This is an innovative PAM solution, and we apply whitelisting, for example, to execute an application, even if the user doesn't have administration privilege. We use green listing for internet web application, even if the user is an administrator. Some internet web application like browsers and email client will always be executed under restricted or minimum minimum privileges. And blacklisting, we apply this to block some processes coming from the internet. This, among with our corporate application store, where the users can install and uninstall previously authorized applications without need to be administrator's account, offer a new possibility to reach zero privileged account. In a moment, we are going to see a little example, and but previously, I want to remark our ransomware engine, what is able to control cryptographic operations in real time, is able to deny access to network resources per application. So one application can access, for example, Microsoft Word can access SME's enterprise data, whether downloaded from internet application not. We can deny access to protected folder, and we can freeze process and ask some other entity like a security operations center before continuing, right? So we offer 2 solutions. The solution for application security application is called VSafe. It's a modular application. It's a modular solution that joined with HDM offer the possibility to reach a zero privileged account. As an example, I'm going to show you how to address this common particular case. In case you want to adjust the date and time from a user, for example, that doesn't have privileges at all, if you try to change that, no settings. If you try to change the time of the computer, the system asks you to enter elevated privileges. All right. With Simarks Best Save, we can achieve this in a very simple way. This just start the administrator and then provide a new rule from here, and then you can say new, check the bullseye, release from on the application you want to control, and say, I want this to execute by administrator the next time. So apply the refresh rules, and the next time the user wants to wants to change the system times, they have privileges under the same account. This is a very simple example, but this is our focus, to have the least privileged accounts on the network. And I want to get back to the presentation. And so this is all for that. You can contact us with us in this account or through cyberwatching. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge. That's very interesting. Very nice of you to also show us an actual example as well, so a demonstration of the solution. So very interesting that helping a company really manage the privacy aspect, and clearly the human touch is also what can be the most damaging sometimes within a company. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to call everyone to, if they have any questions, to put them into the question box, and we have about 5 minutes to look at any questions that people may have. So there's no questions at the moment. So I've got an open question really to any of the speakers. So clearly Anastasia was talking about the GDPR, and Norman, he mentioned that this is a big challenge for SMEs. Everybody has to be compliant. Anastasia pointed out the various aspects of it, and clearly companies with less than 250 employees need to know what they have to protect. And then we heard from Dave with some of his background from the policing sector, talking about how the police are very responsive, so they're very much based on alarm-based reactions, shall we say. And then we have Jorge, who's an SME that is benefiting from providing a new service which can help companies to protect themselves and be compliant with the GDPR. So a question to any of the speakers, really. It's a serious compliance is a serious concern for all SMEs, and do you think that the GDPR puts companies gives them do you see the GDPR more as an opportunity for SMEs in terms of improving the way that they deal with previous issues, or do you see that it puts SMEs at a competitive disadvantage because they have to address so many different aspects all at once? So that's a question to any of our speakers. So if you
if I
want,
may,
yeah, thank you.
I think it does both. And the GDPR, in one thing, in its concept, is very good because it does raise awareness and it does bring in this perspective and underlines the importance of what's going on. On the other hand, how it has been delivered and in the run-up in the 2-year process of the GDPR having been decided on by the institutions, and then its implementation period, that left SMEs behind on the way that they have been, the awareness has been raised on it, and there's still a lot of work to do there and a lot of catch up to do. But yeah, it's both.
Okay, thanks, Norman.
Could I just echo that in terms of any security or GDPR or whatever is always seen as a negative in some respect, a negative because it's a cost that doesn't have a positive impact on business in terms of profitability necessarily, although it also on the same balance should be a positive because compliance with or being able to demonstrate overtly that you are secure, cyberly or compliant should be seen as a positive thing when doing business with other companies who should start requiring their supply chain to be compliant. So I think it, again, like Norman said, it's a double-edged sword, really. It's a negative because it's a cost that can impact negatively on the bottom line, but it's a positive because actually going forward, compliance with should be seen as a positive thing to promote and actually gain business as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, you know, any company who's trying to compete in this field, they need to, well, basically the message is everybody needs to step up and you need to make the right type of investments. I know that often there's a race to get the product to market, and you know, privacy issues in the past were seen as secondary, and now of course the impetus is very much on the company putting that first, and putting the quality of the service first. So I don't know if Jorge or Anastasia has anything to add here.
I would just like to say that I agree both with Norman and Dave on what they mentioned, and I would like to simply add the fact that in our opinion, a lot of times SMEs seem to be on a disadvantage. But when you look at the effort and the budget that multinational companies have to offer in order to ensure that they are in a road of compliance, because compliance, of course, is never, you will never be 100% compliant. I mean, it will be extremely hard considering how fast the market evolves. SMEs actually have an advantage in the sense that they know exactly what they have. They know how many employees they have, and it's easier to have the bigger picture than it is when for like huge multinational companies that have offices in 100 different places. So in that term, SMEs have it easier in the sense that there is only so much. Of course, lack of resources is very important, is a very serious problem, but also the data protection authorities are working very hard to provide guidance for exactly for these type of businesses. So hopefully the SMEs of the future will have it easier in the sense that they will know where to look for the information, and they will not need to spend disproportionate amounts of money in order to ensure that they are compliant.
Thank you. Jorge, a question specifically to you and also to Dave, actually. You're both SMEs providing cybersecurity and privacy services to other companies. When you go out and you speak to small companies, how aware are they? How ready are they in terms of ensuring they are compliant?
Well, here the SME that we go, the truth is this: they are very little prepared, because I think that GDPR and solutions like that. From they have a lack of human resources, and they don't have as big companies have human resources, specifically dedicated to regulation. And my point of view is that the SMEs doesn't have enough resources and times to even to sit and think what the regulation is for how do we say how they affect the SME. It depends on the size of the company, because if they are from 8 to 10 or 8 to 20 employees, I think they haven't enough human resources and money, and they perceive the regulations as a new complication for their working day. This is my opinion. I think that SME needs automatic solutions and solutions that they can apply the day after. So.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Very good point. And they make up a huge percentage of the European economy, the SME community as well. Dave, what's your view on that?
My take, very similar in terms of it's small businesses. It's on the too difficult pile to do in a lot of cases. Again, to echo the fact that most of them will not have a specialist or a specific person within the company who is a security or compliance expert. It's just usually tagged on to someone's job, or even given to a younger member of the family of a small SME who thinks their younger generation, their offspring, may know more about it and can help them out. So I think they're probably looking for an out-of-the-box solution that they could actually buy in, just similar to they buy antivirus software, etc., etc. They just want someone to do it at a set reasonable fee. The only exception to that would be, and I've got no real evidence to back this up, is probably different sectors within the SME are on different levels of preparedness. Whether they're a manufacturing sector or maybe another sector, less so. But obviously, as they go more into the technical sector, they're more likely to be much more tech savvy and, dare I say it, a little bit younger, and actually have a much more awareness of the bigger picture. But I've got no real evidence to back that up. But that's my gut feeling, being one of the silver surfers of this world and a little bit older.
That's great, Dave. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's the age thing is important, and it is interesting your comment about how having a specific expert is just tagged onto someone's job, and I think we ourselves see this as well with the people the network that you have. You can see this as well. So okay, well I think what we'll have to do is call it a day. So I'd like again to thank you for all listening and staying online, listening to our speakers. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for some very interesting presentations. So thanks to Norman, to Anastasia, to Dave, and to Jorge. And we'll be back with you after Christmas with our next webinar, so in January. So we'll be promoting that. And thank you very much, and a very Merry Christmas to everyone listening. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a lovely day.